Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's great to see you all here today. Let's give another 30 seconds for participants to log in. We would love to see where you are joining us from. Please type your location in the comments. We have still some participants logging in. But anyways, let's get started. So welcome everyone to today's LinkedIn live session. Over the past several months, I'm sure all of us have seen the buzz around Gen AI, from it being the fastest tech to reach 100 million users, to setting up of several $100 million funds, over 1,000 plus startups already focusing on this space, to Goldman Sachs predicting trillions of dollars of GDP impact. There is no question that Gen AI is not just a hype. We are starting this series of conversations today to bring on the ground perspectives from industry practitioners in a more informal and interactive format. We will explore some of the questions that are on your mind, such as how are senior enterprise stakeholders approaching Gen AI as a technology? What are the high priority production level use cases and applications? What are the key challenges and risks? And how can organizations be Gen AI ready? We would love to hear your comments and questions as we go along. So please type them in the chat and we would try and address during the discussion and the Q&A towards the end. As a quick introduction, I'm Ashish Sedev, Vice President at Everest Group, and I lead our business in the region. I'm joined by my colleague Vishal Gupta, VP and Head of Data and AI Research, who brings in a wealth of experience and expertise in this space, as well as Piyush Kumar, Vice President, Head Data Engineering at Make My Trip, to share their Gen AI journey with us today. I'll let Vishal and Piyush quickly introduce themselves. Over to you, Vishal.
Thank you, Ashish, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm sure this is the most exciting topic of our times, generative AI. So our intent today would be, as what Ashish covered, right, to go beyond the hype and talk about, what is actually happening on the ground. And we have Piyush with us, who will be sharing, his journey at Make My Trip. But quickly, my introduction: I'm a vice president with the firm. I lead all our research and advisory in the broader data analytics and AI space. I've been covering this area, this industry for more than 10 years now, and closely working on furthering, and developing, Gen AI artifacts and developing the industry standards. So looking forward to this conversation. Piyush, over to you.
Yeah, hi, and hello everyone. Right, so as Ashish and Vishal quickly covered, right, so it's no longer a hype, primarily, right. So I would like to call it like so post-hype phase right now, where uh, things are getting more into reality, things are getting shipped into production. So as company primarily being in online travel, we are very excited. Personally, as a technologist, I am very excited about whole advancements in AI overall and Gen AI specifically, because like so the use cases which we were not able to think through earlier have gotten into reality with many experiments which we have shipped recently in past, right? So yeah, happy to share our learnings with all of you here. Yeah, I head the data platform engineering and personalization charter for Make My Trip and Go Ibibo Group. So Make My Trip Group has multi brands. So Make My Trip, Go Ibibo, Redbus, Trip Money, etc. So yeah, so I look after Make My Trip and Go Ibibo side of both platform engineering and personalization space. Yeah, happy to share my learnings with all of you.
Awesome, awesome. Thanks, Piyush. So, Vishal, let me get this out up front. How do you see Gen AI as a transformative technology? I know there's a lot of talk on, and it's been recognized as the third major platform shift, right? So after internet and cloud. But based on the research that you are doing, where do you see rapid adoption, and do you believe Gen AI will still hold the C-suite radar as we move past beyond the hype phase?
Yeah, so it's a pertinent and interesting question, Ashish. In all my conversations, and I think we are almost like closer to a year of completion since OpenAI launched ChatGPT last year in November, and one of the questions that I keep getting, still is, look, in the last decade or so, we have seen multiple major technology advancements, right from blockchain to metaverse to crypto, and now we have generative AI. And the question I keep getting is, look, some of the past technological disruptions, they didn't come out to be, right? I mean, there was a lot of hype created around them, but then eventually the actual adoption never happened. Is this something similar with Gen AI? Will we see adoption, or is it just kind of a hype period and then it will slowly die down? And I have a very strong conviction. I believe that it's not just hype. Yes, there is some hype and a lot of things, a lot of chatter and talk going on in the market, but I still believe that generative AI is something which is more foundational and fundamental, and it is going to see massive adoption. And let me draw parallels, right? Let me compare it with metaverse and Gen AI. uh, See, metaverse in a lot of ways, where we stand today, Meta has already wound up its, investments and imperative in metaverse, right? Metaverse is no longer something where a lot of people are investing or talking about. Maybe it was ahead of its time. But, if you draw parallels between metaverse and Gen AI, see, there are two big or stark differences that come out. One, the metaverse in a lot of ways was a polarized bet. Meta pumped in billions, and then there was another company, Unity, who, made good investments, and then everybody else in the ecosystem, be it the enterprise users, be it the supply side ecosystem, both technology and service providers, or maybe the private equity investor community. All of them were still sitting on the fence, thinking about what to do with metaverse, right? Whereas when it comes to generative AI, Chat GPT, OpenAI opened the floodgates. Everyone in the ecosystem, from enterprise users to technology vendors to service providers to the private equity investor community, every one of them has jumped the bandwagon. There is billions and billions of dollars being pumped into, furthering their Gen AI initiatives. My strong conviction is, if so many entities and people have come together and put up so much money into something, I'm sure they're going to make something out of it. So that is one first difference that I can make. Second is, if you really think about, I can give you an example. See, Decentraland. I don't know how many of you have heard about Decentraland. Decentraland was one of the most well-funded, crypto-based meta product. At the height of its adoption, it had 8,000 average monthly user base. Now compare this to Chat GPT, in 5 days it reached million, and today, OpenAI says they have more than billion registrants with more than 100 million active average users monthly. See, look at the adoption. The adoption is as real as it gets, because the use cases for metaverse were unclear, but the use cases for Gen AI, they're as clear as it can be. There are real practical implications, practical uses of where the technology can be used. So these two, broad contours makes me believe and gives me conviction that, look, yes, there are hurdles and challenges that we need to solve for as an industry as a whole for generative AI. But I believe that the technology is transformational and it can have real ground impact.
Yeah, yeah. No, absolutely, Vishal. And so, Piyush, let me invite you to share your story at Make My Trip, around AI and more specifically Gen AI. What are the use cases you're going after? How did you evolve in your journey? And also a bit of insight into why did you choose those areas over other areas?
Sure. No, I 100% agree with Vishal, right? So, like, so many minds have come together to solve like real challenges, and like, so they are not just working only on one piece, which is like just building either foundational models or like other pieces of generative AI. They are solving other fundamental pieces, be it like so vector databases to be it any other things, right? So industry has come together to solve this, and hence, right, so it looks more reality itself. Now coming to Make My Trip specifically, right? So and we saw real value, right? So it and like, so it's not we didn't treat it like a hype. Trust me, right? So in our internal conversations, etc., we were looking at like some real world use cases primarily, right? So and we have been working on this journey on solving some customer problems primarily, like so. Either working internally or like so looking at some strategic partners outside as well from industry, right? So we spoke together, right? So this time as well, right? So we partnered with Microsoft primarily, like so to look at like so strategically, can we think through like solving here are the very clear objectives which we want to achieve, both from solving customer problems and from business side of it, and bringing some competitive edge as well, right? So and those were the pillars while we were trying to figure out, okay, which use cases primarily, right? And just to talk about, right, so some of the use cases which went live in recent past, and these were like starting with, right, so very chat GPT specific, right, so which is content summarization. So make my trip as a platform, right, so we collect good amount of user generated content in terms of reviews, etc. But at the end of the day, when the user is coming in, he may not be able to like so digest like thousands of reviews about a property itself, and we made it very contextual, right? So there are two things, right? So one, right, so which generative AI help, and the other is like the contextualization, which is like primarily we were working on other artificial intelligence or machine learning models primarily, right? So in house, right, so enabling personalization, etc. So what we did primarily was, right, so in case of hotels primarily was, right, so to make the content summarization very contextual, right? So if you are a family traveler, right, so you may be less interested in what a solo traveler left a review about the property itself. You are looking for other family travelers reviews and those kind of things, and that's how if you go onto the platform right now, you would see, right, so very contextual summarized summaries of content summarization. The other use case which we dwelled primarily onto, right, was a mix of not just like so Gen AI triggered that, but like so we used other tech stack primarily like speech to text, text to speech, and a combination of like so Gen AI models or foundational models as well, right? So which is to use like voice-based flight booking engine, right? So where like so,
Mhm.
and the case was primarily, right, to solve it for the Bharat Janta, right? And internal code name for the bot as well is like Flight Bharat bot, right? Wherein, right, so users are very comfortable speaking in their native language, right? So and this is not a language which is like very textbook specific, right? These are like very colloquial, right? Everyday use of language, and we wanted to make a seamless experience, right? So, and we had invested earlier into different solutions, tried doing multiple experiments with vernacular, etc. Things were succeeded. We had some good wins. Some were not so successful, etc. But this time, right? So with the whole push by ChatGPT, etc. Right? So we were able to make it really usable product, and we saw good traction on the flight's voice bot as well. The other use case were again into holidays piece. Holidays is again a complex itinerary, right? So a user typically like so wants to explore, discover a lot of things, and then finalize the itinerary and then book, right? So and the hand holding was done earlier through human agents earlier, and this time, right, so uh, we did it through a chatbot interface using chat gpt, and hence, right, so the like so, and these are the broader buckets, right, we where we saw good amount of real world use cases going live and having a great impact, where we were able to reduce the human use or customer interactions, bringing good value, increase the discovery by the user himself on holidays bot as well. So and apart from this as well, there were many use cases which we shipped internally for the internal customers. We are looking primarily, it's not just like solving and automating things for customers primarily, but like so again for developers, they are using code like generation, etc. and utilizing the power of Gen AI primarily to write test cases, to do certain automation related stuff. Personalized recommendations, notifications is something, right? So like content copies, etc. So there were like plenty of smaller use cases, bigger use cases, which we were able to ship into production uh, it- in a very small period of time, and hence, like again, emphasizing on the fact that, right, so many clients across the world are helping you solve key challenges and issues. Yeah.
Yeah, very very interesting, Piyush. Thanks for sharing that. Was there a framework or a thought process that you use to just think where to prioritize these investments? Right, the number of use cases, and I'm sure this is a long journey, right? So, how did you go about thinking and identifying these low hanging fruits?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, so the framework, right? So I would say, right, so it was not a different framework this time which we used, but like, so having very clear objectives onto, right? So what we want to achieve, and then having the matrices defined associated with it, right? Do we have the good data associated with it? Is it good quality data? Like, so because like, so am, am I going to be able to solve this use case, right? Or is it just like, so I'm just jumping onto something, but we don't have the data, we don't have the tech stack, we don't have skill set, etc., right? So we try to attack this like problems, like, and choosing the problem, right? The question is, right, so can other organizations use some framework? My advice would be, right, so uh, go with, right, so whatever framework you have to choose the existing pieces. Just focus on like having very clear objective, that is going to be the must have. And then secondly, having those matrices to measure the success, failure, etc. Because like, so otherwise, right, so because you are going bold with everything, right? So the core theme for us was to go bold, right? So don't be like, so in saying like, do experiments, right? So, and with experiments without measurement would lead to like chaos, right? So, and hence refrain from those kind of things. Have clear matrices. And the third thing, you would have business outcomes, right? So, and those
Mm.
would give you competitive edges, right? So, and we have seen that, right? And absolutely, like, so those three things helped us, right? So where in not just shipping things in production, but like, so really solving some good use cases.
Yeah, yeah. So Vishal, I know you're doing a lot of research on Gen AI adoption trends globally. What are some of the use cases that you're seeing? I know there are lots and lots of them, but more prominent ones that have reached scaled adoption, right? And then also, how should one think about identifying these use cases? And a lot of enterprises are still thinking about, a lot of POCs, but where do we really focus our big investments?
Yeah, so I think, I echo, Piyush's thoughts. See, I think one of the key things happening is the availability of taught data and the content base is deciding where Gen AI can be applied and used in a lot of ways, right? So while, if I share from what I see, in the broader industry, while we see Gen AI being experimented in a lot of different areas, but three areas or three domains have come up as the areas where most of the action is happening. Number one for sure is customer service, or what you want to call customer operations. So think of a customer executive talking to a potential customer, and there is a system, a tool, a Gen AI tool, which is helping. Hey, look, this is the history of the customer. This is what we have spoken to the customer in the past, and these are the potential things that you can potentially talk about, to the customer. So an assistant, kind of a tool which is helping the customer executives to kind of have the right conversation or more or better conversation with the customer. So that's one big area where a lot of the action is happening. Second is sales and marketing. So think of a generative AI tool helping create marketing memos or personalized emails that can be used to reach out to a large set of audience. So sales and marketing is another area, because think of it this way: in marketing there's a lot of need for creating or generating content, right? New content. That's where something like Gen AI kind of rightly fits in. So sales and marketing is the second area, and third area where we see a lot of action happening is in the broader bucket of IT operations, and specifically I'll call out software engineering, because there are a lot of tools, especially with Microsoft Copilot. You can start creating your own code. Now, of course, the tools can't create, the 100% of the code by itself. There has to be a human in the loop. But we are definitely seeing, some of these tools emerging, which are helping in the code creation, development, testing, all of those, the entire software development life cycle, SDLC cycle, where these tools are helping a lot. So these are the three areas, where we are seeing most of the action happening when it comes to Gen AI. Of course, as I said, there are multiple other areas. There are industry specific, use cases. For example, drug discovery in life sciences. Similarly, other use cases in other industries where a lot of experimentation is currently happening. But given the ease of adoption in these three areas, customer service operations, sales and marketing, and IT operations, as well as the availability of content and data, is why we are seeing a large part of the adoption happening in these three areas. Now, the second part to your question is how should one start looking at it? And as Piyush said, right, one of the things they looked at is, look, we looked at what value this use case can provide, how much would it cost us, and at the same time start looking at whether we can do it or not. So one of the things that I'll share is, and this is based on my multiple conversations. See, the ROI and the cost part is pertinent, and I think we'll talk about it. But let me talk about purely from an applicability standpoint. Whether how should we start thinking about Gen AI? And there are two broad things to look at. Number one, what is the potential, which means what is the amenability of the area to application of Gen AI? And within that potential part, there are three or four things to consider. Number one, for sure, is the content or data availability. Whether you have access to the data, which can be used to train the Gen AI foundational model, right? Which is self-explanatory. The second is, and interestingly, need for generative capabilities. See, AI has always been there. AI as a technology has existed for more than 50 years. The term was itself coined in somewhere around 1960. AI is nothing new. Generative AI is new, where the tool, the technology is generating fundamentally new content. So if you want to apply generative AI, check if the particular area or use case does it even is there even a need for generative capabilities. To give you an example, think of, let's say I'm a manufacturing company and I have to predict my inventory, right? And how much do I need to produce and how much do I need to store? That's mere prediction game. You don't need to generate anything. You don't need Gen AI on that. Whereas, if I have to create something as a marketing material or a marketing memo, absolutely yes, a generative AI solution can help. So the need for generative capability is another thing. Then, what is the kind of reasoning involved? So if it is a very, very complex task, probably Gen AI might not be a good solution. So think of it this way: if you have to write a very, very complex code versus a simple code, a simple code, yes, there are code generators, Gen AI code generators, which can help. But for a very complex code, it's actually the developer who has to create it. And the last thing within the overall potential bucket is the dynamism of the knowledge base. So this essentially depicts what is the rate of change of the knowledge based on which a task is performed. So if the dynamism is very high, it is actually good for the Gen AI tool because the humans can't process so much dynamism. So think of it this way. Let me give you an example. If you have to generate stock prices, let's say today, depending upon multiple current events, it's very difficult for a human to do that. But the generative AI tool, by considering all the different parameters, all the, let's say, the news items pouring in, what happened yesterday, what happened today morning, the company reports, everything, that is where the tool will become very good. So this is what defines as the potential. But there is second bucket, also broad bucket, that we need to think through, which is the ease of adoption. Which means you need to measure what are the roadblocks in the path of adoption. And within this ease of adoption, there are three things one needs to look at. Number one, what's the regulatory environment? Which means what is the degree of regulation? The more regulated a business, difficult to apply Gen AI. Think of banking operations. Banking operations are highly, regulated. It will be very difficult to use Gen AI in that because one, the data will be scarce. What data will be used to train Gen AI, and also the output from a Gen AI system is probabilistic at best. It's not deterministic, right? It's not an automation tool. So if it is probabilistic, the bank doesn't know what output the solution will create, and there will be jitters as to what it can do. So the regulation can act as a roadblock. Number two, the data sensitivity. If the data is highly sensitive, again, you can't use it to train the model because there will be risks involved. So think of PII healthcare data, right? Then it becomes very difficult to use that data to create the tool. And then the third part is within this overall bucket of ease of adoption is the criticality of the process, which is importance of the process as measured by the actual or perceived cost of error. What if the process goes wrong because of the tool? Who owns the responsibility for that? So again, think of an example. You have to communicate to a particular employee on their, let's say, leave request versus you create an email or generating an email campaign for an event where you have to reach out to, let's say, 100 or 1,000 people. In the second case, if something goes wrong, if the tool creates something wrong, that's going to impact 1,000 lives. Who owns the cost of error? So broadly, so just to summarize, the potential, which is, measure the amenability of, the process for Gen AI versus what is the ease of adoption. I think these two, if you broadly look at it and try to think about it, will help you analyze whether, a particular area can be, looked at for the application of Gen AI or not.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that's a nice way to put it. Maybe a two by two with amenability and ease, and then put all the use cases, and then probably do some analysis and see where. And of course, Piyush, to your point, I think the having clear objectives is of course very important, right? So a lot of money gets invested in areas as experiments, but they may not have clear objectives, and then the ROI becomes a big question. But Vishal, a nice segue into some of the risk and challenges. I know I think the transformational impact on business is fairly clear, but then there are also these concerns which are emerging related to various aspects of the technology itself. So, for example, data privacy, security, explainability, who checks if it's correct, ownership, who owns the output. So what are your takes? What is your take, Piyush, on the risk associated with Gen AI? And as you've been adopting this within Make My Trip, what are the steps that you are taking to identify and mitigate some of these risks around Gen AI?
Yeah. Our take is right. So some of the risks which are talked about are not new, and some are new, right? So those two buckets, right? So, and for example, right, so even with the advent of, right, so big data and AI, right, so people talked about privacy and like so data protection, etc. And you need to, as an organization, you need to have like so all the mitigation related risk and mitigation related steps related to data protection and rest of the things, right? So I would say, right, so one bucket need to be treated in a similar manner rather than like so anything specific to Gen AI per se, right? So uh, but the other key part, right, so where some are very new challenges in terms of, as you mentioned, right, so who owns it, who owns what, right? So if you're using any maybe like some closed source or open source foundational models to accomplish a task or automate something or generate some content out of it, right? So who owns it, who owns the liability, and who owns those kind of things? That required, right, so good amount of again like rethinking and adding to the organization, like the governance charter, I would say, right? So broadly, right? So and it not just a governance charter, even every feature need to be looked at, thought through, even from like for example the use cases which Vishal was talking about, sales and marketing, right? You need to generate content and ship out, right? There is a brand associated with the content which you are generating, right? And every brand has its own theming, like a language, brand language to talk about and those kind of things, and you need to put all the safeguards with respect to protecting those things, right? So in saying, okay, I am not going to generate something which the brand value doesn't care, or the brand language doesn't speak about. I don't want to generate a content which is not well understood by my customers, right? And hence, right, so you the advice which I'm and learnings for from our side was, right, so bucketize into two key buckets, right? So one, the all the privacy, governance, risks, etc., put it into one bucket, look through your data protection, and rest of the learnings, and evolve, right? And that's a continuous process, right, of evolving and relooking. Talk to experts in industry, right? Have good like so expert consultations done, because like so that review helps you because if you are overlooking something, right, so those could can be brought back to you. The second key bucket, right, so where as I said, right, so every nuanced feature which you are shipping with Gen AI need to thought through from all dimensions, right? So as I mentioned, right, from both brand content which you are generating, putting up, automating, and then there are risks associated to everything, right? So and it could be any other, you can simplify in saying, okay, uh, a new member in your content team might be generating a new content poses a similar risk. But as Vishal mentioned, the risk here is like, so you are not generating one copy, you are generating like thousands and thousands of copies, and humanly impossible to even review. And hence, right, so again, automation to your help in terms of, right, seeing, okay, right, um, uh, you need to devise those automations to be able to pick these things and have an eye on it, right? So but yeah,
Yep.
also learning, as we are shipping new use cases, like red teaming is something which, again, like, so coming from Microsoft, right, where uh, if you need to do like, so have all like the negative cases, etc., so red teaming is helping in some of the things primarily related to chatbot, but yeah, there are other nuances to many other use cases specifically.
Yeah, yeah. Vishal, any other best
Yeah,
practices you are seeing
yeah.
beyond
No,
what
so
Piyush
I
mentioned?
No, I think Piyush, covered it very well. I mean, if I had to just wrap it up, kind of, see the way we see the risk is, four fundamental risks. If I have to kind of put it this way, the data security privacy is the biggest risk, of course, because Gen AI as a technology, needs a lot of data to get trained on, and at the same time, it generates a lot of data in terms of content and other things. So to ensure that the data remains in your enterprise walls, it doesn't go out, it's kind of a big risk. Think of the example of
Mm.
Samsung. I think Samsung was, the public example. One of the data engineers in Samsung, kind of created or uploaded some proprietary code to the tool because he or she wanted to optimize that code. But that the system, the chatbot OpenAI, ChatGPT learned from that code, and then it became kind of a public knowledge. So the trade secret got leaked to the public. That's kind of a big red flag, right? The data privacy then becomes, very, very important because it might even lead to the risk of your existence as an organization, because if your trade secrets go out, then what is it that you have, right? So the data security privacy kind of becomes extremely important. And that is why, what Piyush mentioned, we have seen enterprises applying guardrails, ensuring that the data does not, their proprietary data or trade secrets does not go out of enterprise walls. Number two is, and very interestingly, this might lead us to a philosophical conversation. I don't want to go there, but the point is, how do you who tells what the output generated by the tool is right or wrong, right? Which is kind of the explainability part, or in chat GPT parlance, the hallucinations. If you ask a certain question to the tool and the question responds, there is no guarantee
Mm.
that the answer is right or is based on facts. It can be something which is entirely made up by the tool because it still works on a probabilistic way. So the explainability part, right, ensuring that the output that you're getting is relevant, is right, it's kind of difficult right now. It's not easy to crack. And there are a lot of, I personally know there are a lot of even startups which have been set up just with the purpose of helping with the explainability part. The third is ethicality and bias, which means, see, at the end of the day, an AI tool is what it learns from the data that has been fed to, right? It's kind of garbage in, garbage out. If you train the tool on biased data, the output will be biased as well. So one has to be very, very thorough and comprehensive in ensuring the right data is being fed to train the tool. So ethicality bias is not there. And these three things were always there with AI. The fourth thing, which is new with generative AI, is what we have spoken about, is the ownership. Generative AI is fundamentally generating new content, creating new content or new artifacts. If it is creating something new, who owns it, right? There's a class action lawsuit going on between Microsoft, GitHub, and some of the independent contributors because Microsoft trained its Copilot, Codex, whatever they call it, Gen AI model on the open source code that was available on GitHub. And while it was open source, it was not meant for commercial use, and Microsoft started using it for commercial use. So there is still lawsuit going on. So because the ownership part, first of all, the data that you are feeding to the system to train, you need to have ownership of that data. If you are training it on some proprietary data of a third party organizations, there will be issues. Secondly, the output generated by the tool, right? Who owns it? Because if you trained your system on a third party data, then they can potentially claim the output as well from the tool. So this ownership responsibility part is unclear right now. Is it the tool creator who owns the responsibility? Is it the organization finally who owns the responsibility? Is it the data owner who owns the responsibility? It is unclear. There are multiple lawsuits in the industry, but one has to be very clear to take this aspect into mind as well. And probably this is where, I think what we're hearing is that legal representation in an organization will also become important. In AI initiative, AI project, there has to be some involvement from the legal department to ensure that there are no legal risks involved, while implementing Gen AI.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Maybe
Vishal, makes sense. Yeah,
just two
Piyush.
cents, right? So just wanted to add to hallucinations part, which Vishal said, right? So one of the things which probably like, so again as a learning from our side, right? So with so utilize, right? So I'm sure like so companies like us would have like good search catalog and other pieces. So utilize your internal information as much as you can, because you can rely more onto those kind of things rather than like so the open information from like foundational models. So that's number one. The second part, right? So in terms of, right? So like so whenever like so you're working, right? So have the data tagged properly, right? So this is a third party data, this is your internal data. Having good catalog and governance practices internally within the organization helps, right? So because like so at the end of the day, like so many engineers or data scientists get excited about like so okay, can I just use it and like show okay this is possible. But having those filtration tagging is going to be critical in your overall like process perspective, and hence like so like uh, uh, don't just like so lose the focus primarily on from the process perspective as well. Yeah, and just wanted to add those two things. Yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think this is still evolving, and I'm sure I think a lot of developments will happen. It's a very fast evolving tech, and I think it's just come to think of it, it's just what 10 months, 11 months now. So I'm sure we are still figuring out, and I think a lot of new developments will come in, including a lot of tech solutions around some of these things. Um, the shifting gears, I think the uh, a lot of enterprises are still in the early stages of experimenting with Gen AI, and many of them are still figuring out where to apply and what are some of the use cases. And there's the obvious question about ROI. That's a big question, right? These are big investments. So, how are you looking at the ROI from Gen AI investments, Piyush? Are you measuring it? Is there a good way? What have you learned as you've kind of started measuring some of those things? And also the cost considerations of deploying Gen AI, and any learnings or thought process around that.
Yeah, some of it I mentioned earlier as well, right? So having very clear key and like matrices which you want to key KPIs which you want to measure, right? So before even like signing up and
Mm.
walking that path is going to be very critical. And if you have defined your clear objectives and having a measurable KPIs very well defined, then it is just matter of defining that feature and experiment well within your ecosystem and then measuring it. Now coming back to the execution part of it, right? So how like so on our side, right? So we said like okay, let's partner it strategically with some good organization, right? So in our case, right, we started with Microsoft primarily, right? And then like so that strategic partnership helps, right? So because like so you are getting to know each and every bit of, right? So working together collaboratively with that team. The other is like the internal collaboration also helps, right? So it's not like so just the technology team which he needs to just learn and adopt this piece, right? So internally, right, so every stakeholder, be it like sales, marketing for folks to everyone, right? So taking every internal like stakeholder was like helpful in our case, right? So wherein, right, so
Mm.
everybody was on board, right, to make it work, right, internally. And that was like really helpful in terms of choosing the right use cases primarily, and then executing it, right? And then, for example, like some of the things, right? So for example, in data engineering, right, so we had voice bot baking in from ground up, etc., and then handing over to flight stream itself to maintain and like work and evolve on those kind of things, right? So and that's again another way of experimenting and like making it mainstream with is going to be really important, right? You can't just keep on continuing with that experiment for long. If it is giving good signs, etc., back go back and make it mainstream. And the other
Yep.
key part is, look at not just one other thing, right? So over the period of time is no one model is going to rule them all, right? So it's not like just chat gpt which is going to do everything for you and magical, etc. And hence focus on, okay, and for luckily, right, so we have been investing onto AI machine learning part of it, right, over many years. And we had good amount of many tools, models, etc., internally, which was taken and then stitched together with this. For example, like natural language understanding is now better with large language models here, right? So now utilize your large language models with good prompts, etc., for good language understanding, and then do the rest of the things with other tools in with you, right? So other machine very specific machine learning models, etc., and stitch together a solution rather than like trying to solve everything through LLMs itself, right? So don't go expect, right? So now you would have a magic wand with these foundational models or um, other generative AI models, right? So, and here, right? So, as Vishal also said, right, it's not just text to text; it's like text to image, text to video, etc. And now, so every modality is coming big time, right? So, and if you see even on Hugging Face, right? So the newer models are coming up not just on text to text; they are primarily focused more onto images, videos, etc. And the open community is getting evolved, and having a good sense of what's going on to open AI community is going to be really beneficial for organization. And some of our data scientists are working, even collaborating primarily onto open AI community, and that helps, right? So now you know the state of art, what is going on, and that helps, right? So you know, okay, this is possible, that was not possible, this is how to approach those kind of things, this is the data sets which are getting utilized to build these kind of models, etc. So in totality, right, so doing these things like ease your journey from like ground zero, right? So if you are starting on day zero, my advice would be, right, start with like some strategic partner, etc., or maybe like some APIs, because that would give you a kickstart. But eventually you need to dive in, as I said, right, to go bold, right? It's not going to be a theme where you can be like truly conservative and just looking from outside. Okay, something is happening, okay, when things will mature we will do something, right? Then probably you would have lost the competitive edge, right? So my
Yeah.
only advice there is like follow a good process. If you have followed the good process, taken care of, making sure your internal stakeholders, everybody is onboarded, etc., and then you have explored right tool and model to do the right thing, right? Don't expect LLMs to do everything for you, right? If you have followed those kind of things, I'm sure you would have some successes, and that's how you keep on learning and evolving. It's a journey for us as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
and to
Piyush, you
add
talked
to
about data. Yeah. Sorry, Vishal, go ahead.
Yeah, so to add to that, see again, to your point, Ashish, on the ROI. See, ROI,
Mm.
this is a hard conversation, not an easy one, because the output or the value from some of these may come out in the long term rather than immediate.
Yep.
And that is where we also received a question. It's actually linked to it. Someone has posted a question around how do you look at self-hosted Gen AI services over cloud-provided Gen AI services, right? Or SaaS model. Now, and Piyush, I would love to hear your thoughts as well. But the way I kind of think about it is there are three things to consider when you're kind of making such a choice. One, what is the value you're getting from the use case where you're deploying Gen AI? How much it's gonna cost you? These are the two fundamental things, right? What I'm getting out of it, what I'm paying for it. And then what is the risk associated with this? These are the three things that become consideration. Now, the value part is dependent upon the use case you are using, how critical it is it directly customer facing, it's internal, what kind of benefits you are getting out of it. So value part I can't comment, but from a cost and risk standpoint, we are very clear. If you are creating something self-hosted Gen AI services as opposed to cloud-based SaaS, of course your self-hosted will be more expensive. You have to invest in the infrastructure and the tooling and everything, but it may have long-term benefits, right? If you're using it may become cheaper in the long term if you are planning to do this something as a big thing and for a long period of time. But in the short term, it will be definitely more expensive as compared to a cloud-hosted service. On the risk part, it's reverse. Of course, the cloud hosted service, there are already risks associated with it. Yes, some of the leading vendors like Microsoft and Google, they're embedding some of the responsible AI kind of components in their LLMs and tools. But still, there is some inherent risk involved in cloud because you might be sharing your data outside your organization walls. So a self-hosted Gen AI service will definitely take care of the risk component, but it will also be more expensive, at least in the short term. The third thing, which is the value, is debatable depending upon the use case. So that's how I would kind of put it if you have to select between the two. But Piyush, would be good to know your thought as well, how you are going about it.
No, no, absolutely, Vishal. You have already covered, right? So, in terms of cost part of it, right? So, but I would like to just add one thing apart from cost is going to be latency as well, right? So, and because in certain user scenarios, etc., you want millisecond responses, and here you have again like the large language models out there, right? So eats up good amount of model latency is added, right? Because of you have many millions or billions of parameters primarily, right? Over which, and then trillions of tokens over which these models are trained onto, right? And hence, right, so you look at apart from while choosing which ones you to go for, look at the latency part of it. That's one thing. The other key part there is, right, so which we have already covered, right? Do you have the data to really make it work internally, so make it self-hosted, etc. And the second is cost in terms of again so most of it are GPU hungry, right? So and GPUs are getting way costlier, and the availability is again of a question itself. But yeah, I'm very hopeful that so now, as we in starting as well, right, we mentioned now you have millions of good folks applying their brain onto things are going to be cheaper going forward. It is expensive right now, but hopefully. And I will resonate 110% with Vishal in terms of, right, one, you need to see, right, so is it going to be you are looking at a long term value creation, or you are just looking at right now something to tick off and saying, okay, we are also doing generative AI. No, right? And organizations at scale would want to invest onto these things, and similarly any other technology per se, because because they see real value, right? If you are seeing real value, you would invest onto these things from longer term perspective. And there are two parts to it, right? One is so you can just write simple prompts and keep on prompting onto some others models which you don't have control onto, or you can have your own model where you have good control onto. It could be so you picking up some open source or other available models and fine tune the outer layers of the model as well. So rather than so building it everything from scratch, right? So there are approaches, right, where like fine tuning helps much more better, and then having a good predictable control, because like, so when you are using it for enterprises, you want predictability. You can't just like afford hallucinations and other kind of things, right? So you want a very predictable outcome from whatever like use case you have chosen, and hence, right, so fine tuning some of the models like would help in addition to when you are exploring that path itself. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And Piyush, we talked about the models, but at the end of the day, the data
Yeah, yeah,
is foundation,
absolutely.
is the most, right. So getting the right quality of data is critical.
Right
And
quality of tag data
everyone,
is the most
right.
important thing, right, which is
It's
truly
the most important. Yeah, it's the see. I mean, for I can share
Yeah.
this
and that's the
for a
foundation.
good. Yeah, for a good amount of time, people were actually spending time on fine-tuning the model because they thought the output would get better if I spend time in, optimizing and fine-tuning my model. But now people have realized that there is only so much optimization you can do. The real value or, the output generated depends a lot on data. So now a lot of the efforts are on, collecting the right data, and as Piyush mentioned earlier, annotating and labeling the data. That's also an art in a lot of ways. If you have the domain experts, so let's say, I've even heard cases where, let's say, in the healthcare industry, if you're annotating the data, you're actually having nurses or doctors do that in some cases, because let's say an MRI scan or an X-ray scan, if you have to annotate what to look at within the a layman person like me doing it versus a doctor doing it, there's a huge difference that will come out in terms of how the data is being labeled. So the labeling and annotation part also becomes extremely critical. So the data is kind of the gold mine, I would say, when it comes to AI solutions.
So Piyush, with all this tons of data that Make My Trip has, what's your data strategy, and how are you thinking about, the guardrails around the data that you have?
No, so having a strong like so data governance framework, not just for generative AI specifically, helps, right? So in our case also, like so, and all the compliances which the organization like us need to go through, be it like PCI DSS 4.0 to like everything GDPR compliant to now you have a DPDP bill in India, right? Forcing you to all those things also helps. But at the end of the day, right, so having a good process is really important apart from just having a layout in terms of policies. And Vishal mentioned, right, so the ethical use of, and you need to live by those ethical use of standards, etc. as well, right? So you can't be just utilizing any of the PI information, etc. to in the name of personalization, etc. And those things, right? So uh, large organization like us, right, so live by, right? So and putting up right processes with standards, protocols, etc., lay the core foundation of, right, so having like good adoption. And you and that then you at least like so leaders are like us then go to a good sleep in saying, okay, we have done our part, right, in terms of, right, so we are we have taken care of the process, and rest of the things then are taken care of by itself.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, we now have a data maturity model and framework. In fact, our own Everest Group proprietary framework, and we've seen a lot of enterprises looking at just going through that assessment to kind of see where they are, and then making a lot of changes to their data strategy, because it's a
No,
very
ours
important
is like
piece
so because
of a
we
new data.
started our journey way back many years ago. So, so I would say like so in the like so maturity curve, right? So we are not there in ki roti kapda makan nahi dhoond rahe hain. We are up there, right? So trying to figure out, right? So the real value insights, etc., and those kind of
Yeah.
things from uh, the ecosystem primarily. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So Piyush, one point that you mentioned was around leveraging the external partners, right? And that's a very important decision as you are thinking through this journey, right? Sometimes for POCs, we may want to do it ourselves, and sometimes you may think of leveraging a third party, SI or a tech vendor or a AI specialist, something like that. How do you think about where do you bring in an external party for what type of work? What do you do in house with your own teams? Invest in your own capabilities? How do you kind of think about that decision?
So our take was right. So you have to have your internal team well trained, and it's a continuous learning thing, right? So things are evolving continuously, right? And hence you need to keep on learning continuously itself. It's a continuous thing, even on governance and rest of the things, right? Responsible AI models, everything, the tech stack, etc. But having a strategic partner and experts, consultants primarily, right? So who can guide you on that path, things becomes really easy and systematic and with the process itself, right? And having these combinations, right? So having a good internal team with good skill set and who are continuously learning, along with the other two, right? Which is like so a strategic partner and then expert consultants, really makes the process and the adoption part of it easier. And some of that, right? I mentioned internal stakeholders, right? So it's not just then you need to sell it internally for adoption, right? So the partners helps you adopt as well. And here I am choosing partner as in partner itself, not in terms of a tech vendor kind of a relationship. We should look
Hmm.
for primarily like so a partner who really thinks through those things and helps you walk that journey primarily on that path, right? So we really value those things.
Yeah, 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 makes sense. Vishal, I know we are almost on top of the hour, but any parting comments, Vishal? Any best practices that you have seen from other enterprises that you would like to share to adopt this
Yeah.
exciting new technology?
See, I will pick what Piyush said. Piyush said, be bold. This is what I will tell everyone that see, this is a technology which can fundamentally disrupt every business, every area. You have to take the risks if you want to stay relevant in the game or if you want to beat your competition, because if you don't do it, there might even be an existential threat to your business. So be bold, go ahead, experiment, start adopting this technology, and utilize what we have said, right? Look at the value you want to derive, look at the costs, what it will cost you, and look at what risks are involved. These three should command where you are experimenting, where you are putting your money, when it comes to Gen AI. But the broader message is this is something which is more fundamental, more disruptive, and staying out of it or not being in the game might lead to existential threat. So be bold, experiment, and start looking at areas where you can apply Gen AI.
Yeah. Also, I'm
Piyush.
not sure if there are any technology folks on call, but I would urge them to be the value creator as well, right? In the whole chain, right? So create more models, like so work with the community primarily, right? So and be a value creator. Don't be just the user of it, right? So just want to add to what Vishal said, right? So uh, um, those would be parting comments from my side. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. Thanks, Piyush. Thanks, Vishal. I think this was a very engaging and a very interesting conversation. I hope
Yeah.
our attendees did find it useful. We would encourage you to keep sharing your questions. We took a few questions, but I know we're almost on top of the hour. But if you have more questions coming up, feel free to post. We will try and address them one on one. If not, this is a series. We will have more of these sessions where we will invite other industry practitioners and other experts to share their perspectives on the ground. It's a fast evolving field, so I'm sure there's a lot to be unpacked and uncovered in months to come. So with that, putting a wrap on this, thank you again, Piyush and Vishal, for being very candid and sharing your perspectives. And thanks to all the attendees for your patient listening. Look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.